Hi everyone, I want to try to finish going over this I Pet Goat movie and giving my analysis and interpretation of what I believe it represents. But as always, I'm not really sure where to begin. I have so much that I want to try to explain. But I guess I'll start with just picking up where I left off in the movie. And so I was at this scene over here, which, as I explained in my last video, I believe this represents the rapture. So I'm going to go ahead and replay this scene. I'll slow it down a little bit and I'll try to explain this scene a little more as it plays. And so I believe this is the true Jesus, and I'll try to explain a little more why I believe it's the true Jesus a little bit later, but he's on his way back. And I've talked about this imagery over here, which I'll explain a little more as well. But then it goes to this woman that's trapped inside this tower, which, as I've mentioned before, I believe this woman represents the bride. That may be why there's a cross at the top of the tower. Okay, if you go back to this scene over here, you see that she actually notices something, and so that's why she goes to the window, and I'll play it again. So you can see she hears something or notices something which draws her to the window, and she's looking out the window and she's looking for her Messiah. I believe that's what the heart represents. And she sees a light, and then all of a sudden, as soon as she sees the light, she's taken back. And as I mentioned in my last video, this scene actually reminds me of another scene, a scene from another movie, which I'll show you in just a minute. But first I want to point out this part over here, which is this blood stain. And as I mentioned in my last video, it's been pointed out that this actually represents a keyhole, that it's in the shape of a keyhole. That was pointed out by Jonathan Cleave. Okay, and I actually just finished watching this movie last night, and I just want to say that I believe God has been showing Jonathan Cleave some really amazing things, but as I've mentioned before, I don't believe God shows any one particular person everything. I think everyone put together makes up the bride, and so everyone has their own piece of the puzzle. There's no one person that actually has all the answers, that knows everything, except for God, of course. And so we all make up the bride, and everyone has their own piece of the puzzle, and he's presented some really amazing pieces, but I don't believe God has shown him everything, and I don't necessarily agree with everything that he has been saying. And one of the things that I strongly disagree with is his conclusion that this is all because of the male-female energies being in opposition to each other, that's somehow evil. I strongly disagree with that. In fact, from what I'm seeing in the Bible, the opposite is what seems to be the case. And I've made a few videos trying to explain that. The latest one was a music video that I did about the cleaving together, and it's all pretty much summarized in that video, but I'll try to explain it a little bit. You can see it over here starting with Genesis 2:22, where it says, "And the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of the man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." So God designed the cleaving together here in Genesis 2, and this, of course, is the Lord God's kingdom. This is in Eden, so this is not Elohim's kingdom. This is the Lord God's kingdom. Okay, so the important thing to understand is that Eve actually represents the bride, and you can see that here in Ephesians 5:31, where it says, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh." This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. So God designed Christ and the church to cleave together, just as Adam and Eve cleave together. And so Eve actually represents the church. So Eve is not evil. In fact, one of the things that I tried to show in the video that I did about the cleaving together is how similar the Strong's numbers are that represent God to the Strong's numbers that represent the bride. And so it's ultimately all about DNA. That's why you see the 6-9 in God's name. You see it in the word Yahweh or Jehovah, the Tetragrammaton. It's rendered as 3068 and 3069. So you have the 6 and the 9. And then you have this form of God's name, which is 1961. So you have the 9 and the 6, the right side up and the upside down. And then when you look at Eve's name, you see that it also has to do with DNA, because this is a representation of DNA. I'll try to explain that a little more. But then you see that Eve's name is also a representation of DNA. You have the 23 and the 32. So you have 23 frontwards and backwards, just like you had in Genesis 2. You had the number 2 representing the two sets of the 23 chromosomes. There's 22 autosomes in the human body and 23 chromosomes altogether with the sex chromosome for a total of 46. And there's actually 46 words that make up Genesis 2:23 through 2:24 that talks about the cleaving together of Adam and Eve. And so this is all about DNA. And the word Eve actually means living. And then you also have the tree of life, which is Strong's number 2416. And Eve is the mother of all living. So she's actually the mother to all of us. So she's not evil. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But I just want to point out that the Strong's number for life or living is very similar to the Strong's number for God in the Greek, because the Strong's number for God in the Greek is 2316. The Strong's number for life is 2416 in the Hebrew. And Jesus, of course, had 24 chromosomes, but there's normally 23. Just like Adam had 24 ribs, but he gave one to Eve, which shared the other 22. And so once he gave the one rib, they both had 23, which is still the case now with Jesus, because he was his blood type was supposedly discovered by Ron Wyatt, and when they tested it, it was found on the Ark of the Covenant, and they found out that Jesus' blood had 24 chromosomes. So once again, Jesus has 24, just like Adam did. And actually the number for living in the Hebrew is Strong's number 2424. Strong's number for Jesus in the Greek is 2424. Okay, so the tree of life, which is Strong's number 2416, it actually represents Jesus, but it also represents Eve, because you can see the word Eve over here, which is Strong's number 2332, when it's used for the very first time. That comes up in Genesis 3:20, which again makes the 23 backwards, but you see that Eve was the mother of all living, and the word living is the Strong's number 2416, and it's the same word that's used for the tree of life. So you can see that here back in Genesis 2. Or actually, you can see the word life starting in Genesis 1:20. So it's the word for life, but you can also see it used in reference to the tree of life starting in Genesis 2:9, where it first mentions the tree of life. Okay, and I want to talk a little bit more about this verse because you actually have both trees mentioned here, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And this is coming up in Genesis 2:9, which could be interpreted as 9:11 because the 2 could be 1:11, so it would be like 9:11 backwards. But another thing is that when you add the 2 sets of 46 chromosomes, you get 92. So you also have 92 backwards, which is 46 plus 46. I want to try to explain that a little bit more later. But I just want to point out one more thing about Eve's name. When you look at the different alternate forms of God's name, and you look at this one, which is Strong's number 1961, which you have the 9 and the 6 right side up and upside down. You also have in the Greek, the name for Eve is, okay, that's Strong's number 2096. So again, you have the right side up and the upside down with the 9 and the 6. You can see that's named Eve, which means life, which is 2332 in the Hebrew. Okay, and I'm sorry if that was too small, but you can see it right here in the blue letter Bible. It's the name Haya, and you can see that the name itself is symmetrical. It's Hayah, so it's the same frontwards and backwards. And I've talked about how this is all a representation of DNA, and you also have the right side up, upside down. And this is what God said that his name is in Exodus 3:14, when Moses asked God what should he say his name is, and God said to Moses, I am that I am. And so even God's name, when he said I am that I am, that's symmetrical. And the word I am is the word Haya, which is symmetrical. So this is all a representation of DNA. God's name is a representation of the DNA. And then the other thing that's interesting is if you look at this alternate form of the name Haya, because in the Hebrew the Vav can be pronounced either as a V or a W. And so you have two forms. In this form, you have the Yod, actually, which is symmetrical. You have the Hey, and then the Yod, and the Hey. And then over here, you have the Hey, and the Vav, and the Hey, which is another form of God's name. But this one is pronounced Hava, which is the same as Eve's name. Eve's name is pronounced Hava. And this word means to fall, which is what Eve did. But then it also means to be, to become, and to exist. And so this refers to the restoration, and that's what the name Eve is all about. And so Eve is basically a reflection of God. She's a reflection of the tree of life. She's almost interchangeable with God, just looking at the Strong's numbers. So that actually brings me back to this imagery over here that I talked about, how the dog represents the bride, and you see that throughout this movie. You saw it over here with Anubis, but I also happened to notice it in another scene. Okay, and I didn't notice this until after I had done the video. I noticed it while I was watching the playback, but I couldn't help noticing what looks like a puppy dog over on this side, and then when I looked more carefully on the other side, it actually looked like a face with a mask or a helmet over it, and the helmet or mask actually looks like a horse, similar to this chess piece, which represents the knight. And so I believe this is a representation of Jesus, And so once again, you have Jesus and the bride being represented, just as Babylon is falling.